Hello, I'm Irma Baker. Welcome to our show. Our guest today is a real favorite of ours, Jane Anterzillo, a local author. She is a true crime writer, focusing on the history of crime in Ohio. Jane, it's great to have you with us.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be back.
I love having you on the show. You always have such interesting people to talk about. Not people I'd want to live next door to,
right.
but certainly interesting. And your new book is Wicked Women of Ohio.
Yes.
How did you ever come about to even decide to do that?
Well, I just had been collecting, I had done a book, Wicked Women of Northeast Ohio. And from there I had collected from newspapers and things like that. I'd collected crimes and women that I thought might be good, and I guess that's how it came about. I just, I thought, well, now it's time to do this one. So,
well, it's interesting that you actually start the book not with a wicked woman, but if anything, Maud Collins was just the opposite. She was the first female sheriff in Ohio. Tell us a little bit about her.
Yes, she was. She became sheriff in 1925 when her husband, Fletcher Collins, was murdered while he was trying to serve a warrant. And ordinarily, the coroner would have become sheriff, but he didn't want to be sheriff, and so he asked Maud to take over, and probably reluctantly she did, but she had 5 children that she had to feed. The sheriff's house was her house, so she pretty much had to take the job, is I guess what I'm saying. And it wasn't too long after, maybe a couple of years after she was in office, that she had a double murder on her hands.
Now, what part of Ohio was this?
Okay, now this is in Vinton County, Ohio. It's a little bit south of Columbus.
Okay, so a double murder in this little county south of Columbus.
Yes, yes. And so I went down there because I like to go to the places that if at all possible, I like to go to the places that I write about and see them for myself. And so I hooked up with the president and the past president of the Historical Society down there, the Vinton County Genealogical and Historical Society. And they took me down a single-lane dirt road way back in where there was nobody, and to show me where these murders had happened. The first house where the woman was murdered, there were people living there, and they weren't friendly looking. They were outside and they weren't friendly looking, so we didn't stop. And then the other place was is gone. The house is long gone, and so, but at least I could see, where the murders had taken place.
Well, tell me this: who was murdered?
Well, it was an elderly man and his wife, and they had the man, whose name was Bill Stout. He had a son who was living with a real young girl. She was only about 19, although the newspapers made her out to be much older. She was only about 19, and the woman who was murdered was Bill Stout's second wife. She was the stepmother of the man that committed the murder, or committed one of the murders. And the stepmother just, she wasn't going to have these two living together without benefit of marriage or without benefit of clergy. So she had him arrested, and when he got out of jail, he was very angry, of course, with her, and so he came and, well, we're not really sure whether it was him or the young girl, but one of them came and hit the stepmother in the head, and then tried to burn her body, and was unsuccessful with it. So he was, Maud was smart enough to figure out that he was the one that, you know, needed to be in jail, so she had him in jail. And the young woman was afraid that her boyfriend was going to get put away for good. So, and she was afraid that Bill Stout was going to testify against his son. So she hit him in the back of the head, clobbered him, and she stuffed his body down the well.
This sounds like something out of a horror movie.
Yeah.
And it was actually happening. And we're back in the 1800s now.
No, this is 1925,
Okay,
1927, 28. Yes.
Okay, so this is one of the 20th century murders.
Yes.
So I guess then from what you researched, they were both convicted of the crime?
Yes, they were both convicted of the crime. He died in prison. She was let go some years later, about 10 years later. And obviously, she married and died and had a new name, which I don't put in the book.
Mm-hmm. So these are cases that would have made the news.
They did make the news.
They did make the news.
Yes, they did.
Well, what about some of the other murderous women of Ohio?
Well, one of the women that I have, I think there should be a picture of pretty soon here, is, Anna Marie Hahn. She was a serial killer, and she went after old men who had some money, and she would, talk them into marrying her, or, they thought they thought this young woman was in love with them, and she'd take them for all their money, and then she would poison them. And as she poisoned them with arsenic and croton oil. And as they were dying... I
better back up there. I don't know what croton oil is.
Croton oil was a substance that was poisonous, but it would, apparently it would kind of clear the system of the arsenic. The arsenic would do its work, and then croton oil would, and you see, coroners wouldn't look for croton oil during our autopsies.
So what you're saying is she was smart enough or
pretty
wily enough to figure that she could murder somebody with arsenic and then remove the traces with this oil.
And the worst part of her was as these men were dying, she took care of them.
What do you mean took care of them?
She nursed them until they died.
So everyone thought she was doing them a service and taking good care, and at the same time she was poisoning them.
Yes.
That's a murderous woman.
Yes. She is the first woman to die in the electric chair in Ohio.
And about when did that happen?
Oh, you had to ask me, didn't you? I think it was in the 30s.
In the 30s?
Yes, 1934, I believe.
Well, these would have been stories then that were carried statewide or even nationally.
Oh, yes.
And there would have been a lot of, by that time, the newspapers were circulating so much more than they were in the 1800s.
Right, yes.
Well, we do have a murderous woman who has connections right to Medina County.
Yes.
Who was that?
Okay, well, that was Martha Wise. And Martha, there's a picture of her there. Now that's, she's in prison there. And of course she's much older than when she committed her crimes. She was a very strange woman. She was a strange little kind of insignificant thing. But she had a fondness for funerals. And she liked to go to funerals. She would walk 20 miles to go to a funeral, whether she knew the deceased or not. And she poisoned 13 members of her family, and 3 died. Why she did it has never really been ascertained, but one theory is that she had a boyfriend that the family did not approve of. She had been married to a very cruel man, and she had children. And now she had this new boyfriend, and her mother was the first person to die. Her mother didn't approve of this man or approve of her getting married again. So she poisoned her. And I guess nobody thought anything of it until, and that was at Thanksgiving, 1924. And then she poisoned, on New Year's Day, she poisoned the rest of the family by putting arsenic in the water. And
okay, you've got to tell me this. How in the world could someone put arsenic in water?
Well, the water pail in the house, she put the arsenic in there, and then when the family boiled the water for coffee, it made them all very sick. One, her aunt died, but again, nobody thought, a whole lot of it. But her uncle did. He was suspicious, and he thought that there was something in the coffee. He tried to get the laboratory in Cleveland to look at the coffee pot, but they said, well, it wasn't. You're from Medina County. You're from Hardscrabble in Medina County. So we're not going to bother with this. Well, then she was able to poison the family again, killing him, and really two of his children were paralyzed from the arsenic. Finally, the sheriff started thinking, well, maybe this is a little bit strange. Well, the doctors thought it was strange. But so the sheriff found where she had bought the poison at a drugstore in Medina, and she bought it twice, and she bought it right before she had poisoned people. And then later on, the coffee pot that Cleveland wouldn't test fell into the hands of a chemist in Elyria, and he tested it, and sure enough, there was arsenic in it. And so they finally arrested her. And as I said, that was a picture of her when she was quite old. She went to prison for life. When it was time for her to come out of prison, they tried to find a place for her, but none of her relatives wanted her. I forget how old she was. None of her relatives would take her. They did find an old folks' home, but when the proprietor found out who this person was and what she had done, she said, no, I'm not going to take her. So she finally had to go back to prison because there was nowhere else for her to go.
So her only home then was the prison.
Yes.
But
yes.
Poisoning 13 people in her own family,
yeah.
I mean, that is just a horrendous thing to have happen.
Yeah.
And did she ever herself explain why she did it?
No. She just kept saying it was kind of a case of the devil made me do it. She just, she just kept saying, I don't know why I did it. I don't know, why I did it.
And the rumored boyfriend, did he ever show up?
Yeah, apparently he did. He came to see her while she was in jail, but then I think he probably thought, maybe this isn't. Maybe I better go home to my own kids.
Oh, so he was a married man?
No, but he had children. He was, I think he was a widower. Yes. So
that's Medina's contribution
Medina.
to wicked women. Well, there's another wicked woman that I would imagine a lot of our viewers are familiar with her nickname, but may not know that she was originally from Ohio and had those Ohio connections. And the one I'm mentioning now is the one you have in your book as the traitor.
The traitor, yes, World War II traitor. Her name was Mildred Gillers, and she was pretty much what you'd call a failed actress. She came from Conneaut. She lived in Cleveland for a while, and then she went to New York. She wanted to be the next Theda Bara. but she didn't. She was kind of a a Class B actress, and just never could beyond very small parts. She really couldn't get what she wanted. So she decided that she was going to go to, this was right before World War II, she decided that she was going to go to Europe. She thought that she had a better chance over there. She met a man who was with the Third Reich, and he also was with the German state radio. And he was married, but that didn't seem to bother her. She fell in love with him, and he got her on the radio, and she started feeding propaganda to the Americans and to the Allies, and she became known as Axis Sally.
Well, I'm sure that there are people in our viewing audience who
Might
remember
could be.
or heard about Axis Sally through their parents or grandparents even. But Axis Sally, that was a big. Now there were really two Axis
There were
Sallys.
two. Yes, one was from Italy, and but she wasn't quite as well known as Mildred Gillers was.
What did she do? What was her show like?
Well, she. It was mostly against Jewish. She wanted the young soldiers to. She wanted to undermine their confidence in what they were doing. She told them that their girlfriends were at home and they were, out dancing with the 4Fs. And the 4Fs at the time, I'm sure a lot of people will remember that if you were 4F, that meant that you were medically not able to serve in the armed forces, and so she would, and she would play music. She would play, the music of the time, the big bands and everything, and the men liked that, but apparently they saw through her. As an aside, and this is, you always hear things after the book comes out. Somebody reads it and they say, oh, I remember this, So Sunday I was at a book signing, and a lady came up to me. She bought the book, and she said, Mildred Gillers, she did go to prison, and when she got out of prison, she taught. She taught English, and so this woman had taken English from her. And she said, I remember her. She said, I remember she taught us Shakespeare. And she said, we all had to take a part in the Shakespeare and Lady Macbeth. And she said, Mildred Gillers did Lady Macbeth, and she said she was a fabulous Lady Macbeth.
When you're talking about murderous women, I think Lady Macbeth is right up there at the top of the literary list.
Was right up her alley, yeah.
So you do you often meet people who have any connection with the people in your books?
Well, yeah, sometimes I do. Sometimes I do. And of course, sometimes I seek people out, like I did with Sheriff Maud. I got in contact with her granddaughter, with two other women in the book who were madams. We're
going to talk about those madams in a couple minutes.
One of the madams that I got in contact with that I don't think we're going to talk about today, her great-great-granddaughter I'm in contact with. And then one of the madams that we're going to talk about, I had a very lengthy conversation with her son, who lives in Arizona, and he sent me all kinds of photographs and told me all kinds of stories, and so and that's just so much fun when that happens.
Well, I was fascinated to read in your book about how businesslike the brothels were.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. They were business women. In fact, I have written about a number of madams, and they are all, business women. That's a way for them to, to make money, to have property. these two women that we're talking about, Rosie Pasco and Ginger Pasco, had quite a bit of money, and particularly Lillian, whose son I talked with.
Well, what was the relationship between Rosie and Lillian, or Ginger?
Okay.
Ginger was her nickname?
Ginger was her nickname, yeah, she had reddish hair. Okay, Ginger was it was either her second or third, and her son is not even sure. Her second or third husband was Rosie's son. And he died, and then she married 3 or 4 more times. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. And moved to Arizona. But the way that they finally caught her was through taxes.
So,
excuse me.
Must be dry air in here today.
It could be.
There. Maybe we can get you some water.
That
would be helpful. Well, I was really fascinated in reading about the Madams, and certainly Rosie and Lillian fit into this as well as the other ones, and the business ventures that they had, was the relationship with law enforcement. And I thought it was such a telling comment in your book, that when the police departments were running low on money, what they would do they would raid the cat houses, as they called them, or the brothels, or that, and then they would bring the Madams in, bring what they called the inmates.
They called them the inmates. Yes.
Bring them in, and bring them in front of the judge or the magistrate or whoever, and they would say, okay, here's your fine, pay your court costs, and then they would go home.
Off you go.
And they would reopen. But during that time, the police then would reap the benefits of those fines and those court costs.
Yes. And often the police were some of the customers as well. So, it was kind of and often as with Rosie, she apparently, I'm going to say allegedly, would leave a newspaper in a bag outside her door that had money stuffed in it, and the policeman on patrol would come around and pick up the bag, and so she wouldn't be raided for a while then. But she did have scruples. She would not allow any of her girls to serve any of the boys that were under 18.
So she did have her
she
principles
did.
there.
She did. She had principles, yes. And both she and Lillian were big benefactors of the church. And at Christmas time, they would take poor people, whole baskets of food and clothing and toys for their children. So they were very benevolent.
Well, did Lillian work with Rosie, or did she inherit the brothel, or didn't they move then out of Ohio eventually?
Well, they moved around. There was a house in Findlay for a while, but I don't know for sure whether they ever worked in the same house. But you see, Lillian was more, she was in the 60s and 70s. And so, and Rosie was in the, 30s, 40s, 50s, and like that. So I don't think that they ever actually had a house together, but they each had their own houses.
So a family extended
It was a family,
business.
yes. Yeah, it was a family affair. And now Lillian, her 2 children were adopted. And so apparently she got to a point where she had enough money. She took her children and she moved to Arizona and lived out there until the tax case. And then, of course, she went to prison for a few years and then went back out to Arizona.
Well, let's go on to one more of the madams, and that's Clara Palmer. What can you tell us about Clara Palmer?
Well, Clara, I don't have a photograph of Clara. She came from Pennsylvania. She was there during the 1880s, 90s, and she had what they called the Gilded Bordello in Cleveland. And apparently there was a section in Cleveland where there were quite a few bordellos and places to game and like that. And she got raided regularly, and would go pay her fine, and then she'd go back to her house. And she is one that the Cleveland police used to like to visit. And two of them got caught one night. They were drinking. They got drinking pretty heavy, and one of them got kind of rough with one of the girls, and so they got into a lot of trouble for that.
It sounds like that could be a job deterrent
along
the way.
Well, yes.
Well, it's a fascinating thing to think about how, in a sense, things have not changed over the decades and the centuries. There are still houses of prostitution and
I
such.
think they're a little bit different now.
They probably are, yes. But certainly these are colorful stories from the past of both locally and throughout other parts of the state. Well, now that this book is out and available, and it's available, I understand, online and through bookstores.
Yeah, your local bookstore.
Well, what's keeping you busy these days in the writing field?
Well, as you well know, you and I are working with the Sisters in Crime. You're the past president, and you conned me into being the president this year.
So you're categorizing me as a wicked woman now.
You're going to be in the next book.
Well, what kind of things are you planning to do?
Well, we are looking at doing another conference, another getaway conference in down in Canton at the library, the Cippo Valley Library. It's a beautiful, beautiful facility. It's in the park. We're looking at doing that, and that takes up quite a bit of time. And whatever else comes along, we want to grab every opportunity that we can. We'd like to partner with Romance Writers of America, and we want to grow our group of sisters and misters.
Sisters and Misters in Crime, all the local mystery authors in the area. Well, Jane, it has been such a pleasure to have you back with us.
Thank you.
I hope that you bring out another book or you have something else coming up so we can have you back. And thank you, everyone, for watching today. For our show, I'm Irma Baker.